Okay, great. I'm excited to introduce our speaker today for Governance Week. We have Ethan Bueno de Mesquita joining us from the Harris School of Public Policy at U Chicago, where he's currently the acting dean, yet still finding time to do research and presenting to us today on a really interesting question that's very relevant to Web3, which is about Holdup, innovation, and platform governance. Thank you, Ethan. Take it away.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really fun to be here. It's great to hear what everybody's working on and appreciate the opportunity to present this work. I'll say this is super early stage preliminary work. 2 months ago, there were no results of any sort. A month ago, there were a bunch of results, but it turns out every single one of them was wrong. So these ones I'm convinced are right, but this is early work. I'm really interested in your feedback and trying to think through what is the right set of questions to ask of this kind of a model, whether this is the right model exactly or not. Let me start with just some motivation. Platform economies, of course, the platform markets are common in lots of settings, right? So there's a whole extensive literature in organizational economics about platforms, which are really just sort of markets characterized by sort of like a two-sided market where there's kind of a market maker in the middle who's putting one side of the market together with the other side of the market, right? Setting prices for one or both sides of the market, and the service they're providing is connecting them. So like a canonical example of that from the not sort of internet economy would be something like a credit card company, which is putting sellers on one side and buyers on the other side together, right? And they're really just the intermediary providing this matching service between buyers and sellers. Of course, platforms have become particularly important in the world of sort of the web and web commerce. So you think about Amazon, you think about Facebook, you think about lots of the sort of important sort of Web 2 companies are, their whole thing is that what they are is running a platform that puts two sides of a market together, whether that's content creators and content consumers, like on a social media platform perhaps, or if you think about, say, a video game company that's putting video game creators and video game players together on a two-sided market. So I'm going to think about platforms. Platforms are characterized by lots of things. This sort of two-sided market is the essential nature of them, but they are often characterized by what we think of as lock-in. That is, that once you make your way into, say, providing your product on or consuming a product on one platform, it's hard or costly for a variety of reasons to move to a different platform. And those lock-in effects come from lots of things. So they come from sort of network effects and network externalities inside. So you want to be, it's more fun to be on a social media platform where all the other people are, right? And so, you know, we're seeing this now with the decline of Twitter and everybody sort of vying for control. It's just more fun to be on a Twitter-like platform when there's lots of other people producing content there too. And so if one platform is already dominant, it's kind of hard to move to another one because of the increasing returns to scale. Search costs are another possible source of lock-in. This, like, you know, I buy my stuff on Amazon, and if I wanted to go buy somewhere else, it's not that there maybe aren't any other e-commerce companies where I could buy pens where I currently buy them on Amazon, but I have to go find the name of that company. I don't know it off the top of my head, and it would take me. So there might be lock-in effects. There might also be sort of, and the one I'm going to focus on today, lack of interoperability. So maybe I build a product to the specifications of your platform in some way, and now if I want to move it to another platform, its quality is going to be degraded because it wasn't built for that platform, or I'd have to bear some costs to revamp it for a new platform. You think about, I made a video game for Sony PlayStation and I want to move it over to, I don't know, any other. That was it. We have a Sony PlayStation. I want to move it over to Xbox, and maybe I got to rewrite some code, right? Or maybe it just doesn't work as well. Same thing, I made an app for iPhones, and maybe moving it over to another operating system doesn't work as well. So I'm going to focus on lack of interoperability, but I think there's lots of forms of lock-in that happen on platforms. And creator lock-in in particular creates what we sort of call what's called in sort of industrial organization a holdup problem. It creates a temptation for platforms, right, to increase prices. That once you're locked in and it's hard for you to move somewhere else, they want to extract some more rents for you. They're like, oh, your outside option has gotten worse. Let me take some of it. And we see this a lot, I think, if you think about, and I'll talk about this a little more, think about Web 2, we see a lot of this kind of ratcheting up of the amount of the surplus or the amount of the rents that the platforms are taking over time. They get people in with kind of low prices, and then as they get more and more locked in for some of these reasons, the platforms start ramping up prices on them. And that creates some problems. That creates some problems for markets. In particular, sort of the canonical holdup problem is if I'm a creator and I'm thinking about that, and I know my rents are going to be eroded over time, I start becoming more and more reluctant to invest in creating things of value because I know that I'm probably going to not get the surplus that I generate, that I'm going to lose it because I get locked in. Okay, and so I want to think about that a little bit. So just to sort of give you a sense that at least in Web 2, platform holdup is a real thing. If you start paying attention to this, you hear these stories just constantly of the App Store, increase the fee for in-app purchases from 20% to 30%, or Etsy increase the amount of fees it's going to charge to its sellers. Once you start thinking about it, you're going to hear a story in the newspaper or the radio every week about this happening. Okay? There's lots and lots of what looks to me like platform holdup going on. Okay, so the approach I'm going to take to try and study that, and what I'm interested in here is both that problem and potential solutions to that problem. And I want to think about potential solutions that look like interoperability as well as potential solutions that look like governance. So the approach I'm going to take is I'm going to think about a very simple model of platform competition, okay, where I'm going to think about competition between two platforms, and they are competing for two sides of a market, okay, for users and for creators. I'm going to keep my model simple by, for now, only having one creator. Okay, lots of users, but only one creator. So that creator is going to be very important. The creator can ex ante make an investment in generating a better product, which creates social surplus. But they don't have to, and it's costly to them to do so. The platform would like them to in a certain way because investing in value generates sort of it creates demand, and it's going to create sort of more profits to be shared among these various actors, and more surplus. There's going to be lock-in due to limited interoperability. And I'm going to consider two kinds of responses to that lock-in. One is increasing interoperability, and the other is devolving governance such that the platform can in some way commit to the creators not to engage in this behavior by giving them some governance rights. Okay. Yeah.
So, like, with the extreme form of what you mean by devolved governance, just mean like the platform literally just is ossified? So what I'm going to study here, because I've only got the one creator and I'm going to devolve power to the creator, is I'm going to give them a veto over changes to fees. So they're going to be allowed, they can just say no. And you might think about, in a model that was richer, that had more than one creator, I might create some sort of a democracy where I let them vote on whether or not to.
I was going to say, is this going to be meaningfully different from just instituting a commitment up front? So the platform could give the creator veto power, or the platform could just use some form of immutable code to say this is our price forever. Is there a sense in which these are going to lead to different results?
Not in equilibrium. It's going to be the same.
Cool, thanks.
Though I think we can talk at the end. I think you can think about extensions here where those wouldn't quite be the same, that are, I think, interesting, but which I haven't gotten to. Funnily enough, I think this is actually essentially the exact same slide Andy put up yesterday, right? Which is just to convince you, like Web 2 platforms and beyond are thinking about this kind of devolved governance, not always for hold-up reasons, or primarily for hold-up reasons, but they are interested in this kind of idea of devolving platform governance over important decisions. And here we're going to think about them making devolving governance over actually a decision which is really business relevant, right? About a commerce decision. These are the kind of questions I'm going to try and think about. When does lock-in undermine creator investment? Does interoperability solve the lock-in problem? Can governance solve the lock-in problem? What does the platform's willingness to pay for each of these two kinds of solutions look like? How does the platform feel about interoperability versus governance as solutions to this kind of problem? There's going to be a bunch of results. I think if I went through this, you wouldn't have any idea what I was talking about. And instead, I'm going to do the model, and then we'll talk about these results at the end instead. Okay. There's a bunch of sort of related ideas. Obviously, I'm building on sort of enormous literatures on holdup, which is a very old idea, on two-sided market competition, which is also a less old idea, but still a very rich literature. Democratization as a commitment device, which is an important idea in the political economy literature. And then lock-in and platform governance. And I know that this paper was presented, I think, here last year. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of what's going to be different here between these two papers, this paper has a lovely kind of fully dynamic model of a platform economy where governance is a possible solution to a lock-in problem, but it's going to black box lot of the underlying economics. So there's going to be no endogenous investment in quality, and there's not going to be price setting and the like the value of what's going on the platform is going to be left as a black box to further this sort of studying of the dynamics of governance, which I think is a really nice and smart approach. I'm going to do kind of the opposite. So I'm going to do a 2-period model instead of a fully dynamic model, although I think you'll see it would be straightforward to extend what I'm going to do to a kind of a Markovian fully dynamic model, but I'm going to do a 2-period model. But I'm going to open up that black box. So I'm going to actually model pricing and investment decisions to try and get at this holdup idea.
So this is investment by the creator, or
investment by the creator?
Okay. Yeah. So you're sort of micro-founding the response of the user side.
Exactly. And then I'm also at the end I'm going to ask about investment in governance. So I'm going to give you results about willingness to pay for governance, and then I'm going to do, if I get to it at the very end, I'll talk about suppose that choosing to implement governance or not was an endogenous decision inside this market between these two platforms that are competing with each other. What would happen? All right, so here's the model. I'm going to have two ex-ante identical platforms. I'm just going to call A and B. They're completely identical. Okay, they're symmetric to each other. I'm going to have one creator. I'm going to have a unit mass of users, each with per period unit demand. Okay, so they want to buy 1 unit of whatever it is the creator is selling each unit, or they may want to depending on the price, but they have demand for 1 unit. I'm going to name them I, and then they're going to have a type lambda I, which is going to be they're going to be heterogeneous, and for now everything's going to be uniform, although some of the closed form solutions depend on that, but you could obviously, nothing particularly important about the uniformity. Here's what happens in the game when there's no governance, okay? So at the beginning of the game, platforms set first period fees. These are going to be fees, for now I'm not going to microfound this, although we know from the Richer and Tirole results how to microfound this. I'm going to have them only price one side of the market, okay? So they're not going to charge users. In fact, if they could, the platforms here might want to sometimes would want to subsidize users. I'm going to have them only charge only price one side of this market, so they're going to charge transaction fees to the creator for every transaction. Okay, and we're just going to call those fees cleverly fee. So each platform is going to state a first period fee. The creator is going to choose which platform to join. I'm not going to allow multi-homing for now, so they're going to join only one platform. They're going to choose whether the quality of their product, okay, and that's going to be a binary choice. It can either be sort of the baseline quality, the default quality, or it can be high quality. Okay, getting high quality is going to be costly, and they're going to choose the price that they charge for the product on the platform that they join, and they're not going to be able to price discriminate across users. So they're going to set a uniform price for the product. Users then observe all this. They decide whether to purchase the product on the platform or not. Okay? So the users are obviously only going to join, because I only have one creator in this model, they're only going to join one platform. They're going to join the one where, if they're going to join it all, they're going to join the platform where the product is available. If we had more creators, obviously we could get a richer model of users moving across platforms.
Ethan, this might be kind of a dumb question, but I'm just trying to understand where this is starting from. So before period 1, neither platform has any users? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, you can think of it that way, or you can think of you can think of this as the marginal creator and users making decisions. But what is important, what is going on here that's relevant is that users this creator is not small relative to this economy, right? Users care in their platforming choices about whether or not this creator's product is available. So in a world in which these platforms were already enormous, users were already places, and this product on the margin, right? There was an infinity of creators, and this product didn't really matter. Decisions would be different because there would be no change in demand in response. So what's important here, one creator is not important. What's important is that the creators are not small relative to the economy. They're doing something that is consequential to users. Users are willing to go to a platform to get their product.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm just trying to think through it seems like there's a big difference between the discussion of glomming governance onto a platform that's already huge, like ex post, because people have learned over time about this holdup problem, versus a new platform, a new, let's say, Web3 platform that doesn't have any users yet. And it seems like there's a big...
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's hard to capture that difference game theoretically because game theoretic agents are so smart. Let me think, but I see what you're saying.
Because it's like, I feel like when I talk to people starting platforms now, they're often, even if it's Web3 and even if governance is built in, they often still have this thesis that like the governance itself won't pay off for a long time. Like no one's gonna shop platforms based on governance, which seems like a behavioral claim.
Yeah, so no one's going to shop governance based on, no one's going to shop platforms based, well, okay, so yeah, interesting. Users are not going to shop platforms based on governance here. Creators, well, users are simply going to go to the platform with the best product at the best price, right? But which platform gets the best product at the best price will be a function of equilibrium decisions by creators, and creators are thinking about tomorrow. Like that's it. What's important is that creators here are anticipating the holdup problem, and they know that if they build a really good product today, and that product doesn't work as well on the competitor platform, tomorrow they're going to lose some of their rents. And therefore, their decisions about where to go and how good a product to offer do depend on governance. Yeah, so that's what's key. Period 2 is exactly the same in the sense that platforms set second period fees. Creators can choose which platform to go to and which price. Users can decide whether to purchase. The only difference is that the quality decision only happens once. Okay, so it's not. So if you're going to invest in quality, it has to be at the beginning. Like this is like the end. If we had a fully dynamic model, we could keep allowing quality investments. That would be fine. But when you're doing a two-period model, you want a sense of the beginning and a sense of the beginning, or early and late. And so late, it's too late to create the quality. Okay, so you can create quality at the beginning.
So the creator can switch from period 1 to period 2?
The creator can switch platforms from period 1 to period 2. And as I'll show you in a moment, what lack of interoperability is going to mean is if you invested in quality, you lose some of that investment. Okay, so what does interoperability mean? Quality investment is platform specific. If you just offer the baseline product, we're going to assume those are interoperable across the two platforms. So this is like in the sense of like in the past, we've already had this idea or whatever. If I buy quality on platform A and I switch to platform B, it gets degraded by an amount alpha. Okay, and so alpha is just a parameter of this model which measures the amount of interoperability between these two platforms, right? So if alpha equaled 1 over theta, then when I moved, I would go from quality theta all the way down to quality 1. That would be complete lack of interoperability, right? It would be like I was offering the baseline product. If alpha equaled 1, that would be perfect interoperability, and in between those two, we have varying degrees of interoperability. Make sense?
I understand this is a parameter, but in principle, that like a competing platform might want to build in operability.
Yeah, and so so here's what I would say. I've thought about this a fair bit for this model. I think that it's right to think in most settings that interoperability is a two-way street, and that you can't unilaterally create right. I'm going to show you what level of interoperability the platforms would choose in equilibrium, and it's not complete interoperability. And I'm going to show you how it changes with governance. Okay, payoffs are, I think, completely straightforward. So users value quality, they pay prices, and then this lambda, that's the user's type, they're just heterogeneous in how much they value this product. Okay? So the higher lambda is, the more I value the product, whether it's, right, so Q can be 1 or theta, whether it's 1 or theta, I still value the product more if I'm a higher type, but I value it more and more, right? There's complements here. If I don't purchase, I just get a baseline payoff of 0. What do creators care about? Creators care about how much money they make. So N is the measure of users who purchase. Okay? P is the price they charge per transaction. Fee is the fee they charge per transaction, right? So this is the net revenue per transaction. This is the total revenue. And then if they invested in quality, they have to bear a cost C, and C is positive. Does that make sense? And platforms also just care about how much money they make, right? So that's the number of transactions, that's the fee for a transaction. I'm assume that the platforms can operate at 0 marginal cost. And I'm going to have players discount the future by delta. This is grayed out because, in fact, this doesn't matter at all. They could not discount the future, and everything would be the same, except that all the formulas would be nicer. So it should probably be that way. Okay. Governance. I'm going to introduce later the possibility of governance, where governance, as I said in my answer to Scott, I think is just a commitment device. So what I'm going to think of as the governance solution here, since I only have one creator, is the platform can hand the creator a veto, right? And say, like, I'm going to give you a veto which says that if I propose a change to business terms, which here just means fee, you can, if you've already joined my platform, so you're already a member of my platform, and I propose changing the fee structure, you can say no if you want to. In practice, what this is going to mean is I can lower my fees, but I can't raise them. Okay? I'm going to focus in almost probably all of this talk on one-sided governance. That is, only one of these platforms has a governance solution, not both of them. At the end, if we get to it, I will show you that in equilibrium, that will be true, at least in pure strategies. That is, if this is actually, I think, some similar to a conversation we had 2 days ago. If both platforms can have this governance solution, they're going to compete away with each other all of their profits. And so two-sided governance is bad for these platforms here. There isn't going to be a pure strategy equilibrium where they have it. There is, however, a mixed strategy equilibrium where they both buy governance with positive probability. I'll show you that too if we get to it. But if governance is costly and endogenous, in pure strategies, we're going to have at most one platform implementing a governance solution. So I'm going to focus on that case for now, and then at the very end, I'll show you those results.
Why don't the creators ever want the fee to go up? Is there never a case where they think like the platform needs more money to actually?
So this is what I was alluding to when I was answering Scott's question from online, which is, I think if you could imagine enriching the model such that an event could happen such that the business needs to do so, right, needs to change policies in some way to save the platform or to keep the platform viable, that the creators would all agree to, and that thing maybe is not contractable. And so it's hard to write it into code or it's hard to write it into a contract, but you can do it with governance. And these guys would be willing to let them do that in the extraordinary event, but not be willing to let them raise the fees just in the normal order of business. And in that world, governance as a solution would dominate things like contracting or writing it into the code. That's not here, but that's in the back of my mind as like kind of the obvious answer to, well, why don't they just write the contract? Right? I mean, maybe there's uncontractable events that governance allows some flexibility, but while still solving the holdup problem.
I should say, as a footnote, I think that's a less understood value of governance in these Web3 communities a lot of the time, right? There's an easy sort of knee-jerk, well, we can just write immutable code, but then of course something happens and you're like, oh, well, maybe that shouldn't have been quite as immutable as it was, you know? So I very much like that answer. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
Okay, so let's talk about what equilibrium looks like. So this is a simple game to solve, right? Despite the fact that a month ago I solved it wrong. So this complete information game is...
So Ethan, just so I'm clear, so with or without governments, the question is just in period 2, can they make the fees bigger than in period 1 or not? Like, is that part of the strategy space?
That's the key. What governance says is they can always propose to do so. Governance says that the creator can veto it.
But that's not explicit in the model, or it is?
That is explicit in the model. I don't even think, I guess, of there being 2 games. Okay? A game without governance, where they just can, and a game with governance where they can, if and only if also the creator says yes. And I'm going to compare those 2 games.
So you're not, my first thought was you just fast forward to the upshot and just like define the strategy space differently for the platform, where the strategy space is in period 2. In one case, you can set it wherever you want. In the other case, you can set it to be...
Yeah, no, that's not...
That's not what you're doing. So this is going to be like...
Those 2 things will end up having equivalent equilibria. I'm gonna tack it onto the extensive form.
Okay.
I'm gonna give the creator an actual explicit move, which is say yes or no. But they're equivalent. But it's obvious, but a result that they're equivalent, right? And in the world in which you could have these shocks, they no longer would be equivalent. Okay, so we're just going to look at subgame perfection of this game. So what does that look like? So we're just going to work backwards. So at the end of the game, right? So what does user demand look like in period 2? Given some quality choice Q, given some price P on whichever platform the good is offered on, well, you're going to buy the good as long as that's better than your outside option, and that's going to give us demand, right? And it's going to be because of uniformity, it's going to have the obvious functional form, but again, there's nothing important about that. What's important is it's decreasing in price and increasing in quality. Okay, and so then we're going to be able to say, well, what are going to be the equilibrium prices, right? So here is the objective function of the platform. This is the per transaction. This is the per transaction revenue. This is the size of demand, right? Because these guys are important in this economy, they're not small relative to this economy. Changing the price, changing the quality is going to change demand, and they're thinking about that. They're going to set prices to, right? The benefit of increasing the price is you get more per transaction. The downside of increasing the price is fewer people buy. You're going to get an explicit solution for prices, which is going to depend on the quality of the good as well as on the fees being charged, right? So there's pass-through here. When the platform increases the fee, the platform passes some of that fee on to users, right? They don't pay all of it themselves. In the form of increasing the price. So a bad thing about increasing the fee from the platform's perspective is that it gets passed on to users, and therefore that decreases demand.
So are the lambdas uniform?
The lambdas are uniform.
Okay.
And so we can just write down, given the optimal pricing, what the creator's profits look like in period 2 if they're on platform J, given the fees, right? And that's just a number we can, a formula we can use. What platform are we going to end up on period 2, given these market decisions, right? So given the demand and given the pricing. Well, I'm just going to write A and B are symmetric, so I'm just going to think about the thought experiment. Suppose they started in period 1 on platform A, and you should just remember that the continuation game where they started on platform B is exactly the same. You just change all the letters. Right? So I'm always going to index on suppose they joined A. So if they had started on A, so if they came into period 2 working on platform A, and they hadn't invested in quality, so they were offering the low quality product, right? The creator wants to join platform A if they're going to make more money, and we've figured out how much money they're going to make here. It's their quality minus the fee over this thing, right? So if the quality is 1, we've got these 1s, the Q becomes 1, and it's just this comparison of the two fees. They're going to go to whichever platform has the lower fee. This is obvious, right? There's no interoperability problem in a world where you're offering low quality. These platforms are completely identical. You go to whoever charges you the lower fee. Therefore, in equilibrium, they compete each other down to 0. Both platforms have to charge 0. Okay? And we're just going to assume then, as one always does in subgame perfection, that they're going to stick with A. Does that make sense to everybody? So in a world with low quality, now interoperability doesn't matter. Platforms have to just compete themselves all the way down to not making any money.
So one thing that you could do as a creator is invest in interoperability, and it could be costly to you. It's like equivalent to like having, and so I could see why a creator wouldn't want to do it. But one thing that a creator investing in interoperability would do is create externalities if there were multiple creators, because they would become like an inframarginal creator that would potentially create price competition.
If the platforms can't price discriminate across the creators.
Yeah. So like one thing that creators might want to do is subsidize Mr. Beast to be very flexible about his platform choice, because that will induce pricing competition between platforms.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So it's an externality. I know you only have one creator, but
yeah, that's interesting. Things are different in a world in which ex ante the creator invested in quality, because now there is lock-in, right? Without quality, there's no lock-in by assumption, and that's not important. As long as there's less lock-in, it's fine. There's lock-in because of this interoperability now binds, yeah? And so now the comparison is different across the two platforms, because if I switch from A to B, right, I degrade some of what I'm offering, and that means that even at price 0, right, even if B offers no fees at all, A can beat them, and they can beat them with a positive fee. So A is going to win here, and they're going to win at exactly the indifferent point. This is the usual result in a holdup problem, that the platform here is going to be able to extract from the creator all of the excess surplus between what they're making here and their outside option, right? And that's just because this is demand bargaining. Okay, so A is going to win here if there's been an investment in quality, and they're going to win at positive profits. Right? They're going to be able to charge fees because B knows they're going to lose some of the quality they've invested in. The creator knows they're going to lose some of the quality they've invested in if they move to B, and that's going to come at a cost in terms of profits, in terms of demand, in terms of the prices they can charge. Okay, so we can just summarize period 2. None of this is important other than to see that what's going on here is I mean, it's all important for solving the model, but none of it's important to know, except for this, which is to see that the creator is having their second period rent eroded by alpha, right? That in the end, the profits that the creator makes in the second period don't just, right, they do respond to the quality investment, but in a way that's degraded by the lack of interoperability, precisely because the platform is extracting those rents from them. Okay, so what happens in period one? So in period one, everybody's identical, right? The two platforms are identical, which means that they're going to have to compete each other down to zero, right? They both want, there's positive profits to be made for the platforms if they can get the creator to join them. In the first period, they're identical, so if one of them offered a lower price than the other, they would win for sure. And so they're both going to have to charge zero. I apologize, this is a typo. This should say fee 1A, fee 1B. All the fees in the first period have to be zero. Okay? And so the creator says, well, what are my choices? My choices are I can invest in quality or I can not invest in quality. If I invest in quality, right, I'm going to get a payoff today. I'm going to get that same payoff tomorrow, because if I invest in quality, fees will stay zero tomorrow. Right? This is just discounted by delta. It doesn't matter. If instead I invest in quality today, I'm going to get the fee of zero today. And so I realize all the value of that quality investment today. But tomorrow I'm going to lose some of it. And I'm going to lose some of it because of this thing we saw here, which is that I get lock-in and some of my surplus gets eroded. Okay? And I have to pay the costs of buying the quality. And so when I'm going to do it if the costs are low enough relative to the magnitude of the quality value and the size of the lock-in effect. That's obvious, right? So if costs are low enough, where low enough depends on theta and on alpha. Okay? And so what does this tell us? This tells us that we're going to get, in this world without governance, but with lock-in and with some interoperability, we're going to get quality investment if the quality investment is sufficiently valuable. That is, if theta is above some theta hat, okay, which depends on the other parameters. If interoperability is sufficiently high so that there's little enough lock-in, okay, that's only you need some minimal. So if C is too high, if costs are too high, you'll never get it. But if interoperability is sufficiently high, and as we've already seen, if costs are sufficiently low, okay. So what's true? Greater interoperability, right? So this is where we're starting. Is interoperability is the source of lock-in here. So if we have greater interoperability, we're going to get more investment in quality, because there's going to be less worry about lock-in, and so more willingness to invest. We're going to get higher total surplus, creator surplus, and user surplus. But for the platform, surplus is non-monotone. Okay? Platforms, and here's the picture. Okay? So the x-axis here is alpha. That is the amount of interoperability. Okay? And these pictures are every player's surplus. And what you can see is everybody's surplus is increasing in alpha, some of them discontinuously at the point of, right, so alpha hat is the point at which we first invest in quality. But everybody is weakly increasing in alpha. Here they're flat. And sometimes for some players there's a jump depending on who gets passed through to, but not for platforms. Platforms are flat before the investment. They jump up discontinuously at the investment in quality, because it is only at the investment in quality that they get the lock-in effect, right? And they start getting to extract some rents. But so there's this discontinuous jump up because, oh, here now I get to extract some rents. And then as alpha gets higher, the amount of rents I can extract gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Why? Because there's less and less lock-in, right? And so in that second period, my bargaining power is weaker and weaker and weaker. Okay? So for the platform, the optimal level of interoperability is not zero, nor is it complete. It's in between. It's where you get just enough interoperability to incentivize investment in quality while holding competition to a minimum, right? As alpha gets bigger, in some sense, A is facing more and more competition from B in the second period, and they don't like that. So the optimal level of interoperability that the platform would set is well short of completed interoperability, but it's not none. Okay? And if there was some lock-in effect that came along with low quality also, not just with high quality, what would happen is that this thing would be increasing a little bit, but there'd still be this discontinuity in this non-monotone. So platforms want, in a world without governance, platforms want some interoperability. They don't want complete interoperability. Everybody else wants complete interoperability. It's good for everybody, right? It increases creators' bargaining power, which is good for them. It increases creators' incentives to invest in quality, which is good for users.
In a world with like total interoperability, are there still incentives for new platforms to arise?
Not here. So platforms, in a world with complete interoperability, platforms are operating at zero profits. Sorry. So no. Now, that's a frictionless model where competition is getting us down to zero profit conditions. Okay, so now suppose we introduce some governance, okay? So suppose that one of the platforms, but not both, have the ability to hand to the creator a veto that says, I can't change the fees without your saying yes. Okay? So I'm going to think about platform A having that governance solution, but platform B not having it. And later I'll talk about endogenous investment in governance. In equilibrium, as Tim was saying, we could build this straight in, but here I'm going to have it be part of the extensive form. In equilibrium, that's going to impose the constraint that A could reduce its fees, but it can't increase them, right? Its strategy space still includes increased fees, but in equilibrium, those fees will always be an increase in fees will be vetoed, and so they won't ever do it.
So it's like a 4-stage game now, or what is it going to be?
I mean, the extensive form it's a long extensive form. I think the only thing to think about, if you just think about the timeline of the game, what happens is in the second period when I impose my fees, after that there is a move by the creator, which is yes or no. And if they say no, fees stay the same as they were in period 1, and if they say yes, they go to the changed. In period 2, if we had low quality, we are still in a world where the two platforms are identical. They have to compete down to zero. If A didn't offer to revise it, if A had a positive fee in the first period and didn't offer to revise it down, it would lose, right? B would win. So it's going to offer to revise down. The creators will always say yes to a reduction in fees. And so everything stays the same as in the model without governance with low quality in the second period, right? So everything you just saw is still true. But that's not true with high quality, okay? So with high quality, if I started on A, right, at high quality, I still face this same comparison, yes? And A still wants to win, right? So if they were charging a fee higher than the fee we found before, yeah, which was the minimal fee, the maximal fee that allowed you to win when B was charging 0, you got to revise down. But if you were charging a fee below this, you're not going to revise up. Yeah? So you're going to end up at this fee in the second period if you were charging more than it, and you'll stick with the fee you were going to charge before if you were charging less. And on the equilibrium path, this is where we're going to end up. Right? On the equilibrium path, what's going to happen is that A is going to offer a lower fee in the first period, right? And because they're committed to it in the second period, right, they'll be able to make that smaller fee, but for both periods, instead of a higher fee, a 0 in one period and a higher fee. So this is where we're going to end up on the equilibrium path. So now we just want to ask, period 2 is quite similar to the previous model, but period 1 is quite different, because now when I ask, should I join A or B, A is making this commitment, right, at least a partial commitment. If they offer a fee below this, right, they won't revise it in the second period. So the question we want to ask is, can A commit to a fee that's not 0 in the first period and induce quality investment by the firm, by the creator? Okay? So A faces 4 constraints. The creator has to prefer A at that price to B when they invest in high quality in the first period, and that's just going to give us a condition, right? So if I do A, I'm going to make this payoff, and I'm going to make it now both periods, because they're not going to revise that fee. Right? And I'm going to bear the costs. If instead I do B, well, in this period, they're going to charge 0 in the first period, and I'm going to make that same payoff I made before. In the second period, they're going to behave just like in our old model. They're going to have market power, right? And they're going to erode some of those rents. And so I'm just going to get a condition that says, like, A can charge a positive fee. It has to be below some number, which depends on the amount of lock-in, but that number is always positive. Okay? So this is a real constraint on the fee you can charge, but it's always satisfiable. So A can always set a fee in the first period that if they invest in quality, they're going to prefer A to B. Right? And the reason, of course, is B doesn't have the commitment power. So even if B offers 0 today, we know they're going to ratchet up tomorrow, right? I can offer something in between for both periods that they like better. There's another constraint, which is once we get to period 2 at high quality, do they want to switch to B? That's just another constraint, and the answer is that never binds. Switching to B in period 2 is strictly less desirable than switching in period 1. So this constraint implies this constraint. Okay? Third constraint, when I've invested in quality, I have another option. If I'm thinking about investing in quality and going to A, I could also not invest in quality and stick with B. Right? So that's another constraint I got to think about. I could just live with B, right, in both periods. That's going to give us a constraint that's going to depend on the costs of investment, and we're going to get an upper bound on the cost. And importantly, the upper bound that we're going to get on the cost is higher than the upper bound we're going to get on the costs in the no governance. In the no governance world, investing in governance is more attractive now, right? Because because I'm not getting my rent eroded in the second period. And finally, you have to prefer to invest in quality rather than not invest in quality, and that's going to again give us a not binding constraint. If you're going to not invest in quality, go to B, because B can't commit, and they're going to give you all the rents. Whereas A is already committed to this fee, they're not going to lower it for you tomorrow if you didn't invest in quality. So if you're going to not invest in quality, go with the guy who didn't commit to sticking with a high fee. Okay, so we're just getting these 4 constraints, which boil down to 2 constraints. You got to prefer to invest in quality and stick with A over B, and you got to prefer to invest in quality over not invest in quality. That's going to give us 2 constraints, one of which is always satisfiable. It's a real constraint, but it's always satisfiable. The other of which is satisfiable if and only if the costs aren't too high, but how high they have to be is a weakening of the constraints relative to the no governance world. We could also write that in terms of theta, the quality advantage. But what I want you to see here is it is easier to induce quality investment in a world where you have governance than it is in a world where you're not, because you can commit not to take all the rents. And of course, in equilibrium, you're going to walk right up to the constraint line, and the creator is going to be exactly indifferent between these two, but you're going to get quality more often, and that's going to be good for the platform and good for the users, even if it leaves the creator indifferent.
And a nice feature of this too is if you had multiple platforms with governance or with commitment power, and just they're exogenously endowed with it, then they're going to be able to, the platforms are going to beat each other up on price all the way down to 0.
Exactly.
So you'll get perfect quality. Creator gets all the rents from their quality.
That's right.
It's kind of the competition kind of gets you to the right place if you have multiple platforms with that commitment power.
Which is why,
Which I think is a feature, not a bug. I think that's a good.
Yeah, I think that seems right. Yeah. And it's why, of course, in pure strategies, if governance is costly, they'll never buy it.
Yeah, right. That sounds.
Or only one of them will buy it.
Yeah, but if commitment power is cheap enough, then
you can get.
I see the equilibrium point, but then that seems like good economics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we might like.
The platforms aren't really doing anything useful in this model other than being the conduit on the way to the creator.
Yes, I think that's pretty. So that's true quite generally.
They shouldn't get paid. Yeah,
exactly.
In this model.
Yeah.
Another interesting that's not here, but with multiple as the number of creators grows, you might think that the governance costs grow because now you have a collective action problem among the creators.
Of course, here that's not. Here, all of the creators would agree on everything. Yeah. In this particular, they all just say don't raise fees, right? Yeah. You could imagine a richer model where that's not true, but here, actually, you could just delegate one person to vote and they'd be fine.
Although you might still have the collective action problem that nobody wants to be responsible for the delegation or something. If you need a quorum of a certain number of votes or delegation approvals or something.
Yes, and that's interesting. If voting itself is a little bit costly, now maybe there's actually governance doesn't work quite as well as this, and there is still some room to exploit lack of to exploit lock-in. That's interesting. Okay, so what can we say when we compare the worlds with one-sided governance to no governance? What's true is that there is more quality with governance. Okay, so on the x-axis here, we have the value of the investment, that's theta. And on the y-axis here, we have the amount of interoperability, and this is just showing you the worlds in which we're comparing the no governance and governance model. Everywhere here, we're getting quality if we have governance. but there's this I don't know what that shape is, where we get it if and only if we have governance, right? So governance slackens the constraint for getting quality by allowing us to allowing a space where there's valuable investment to be made in terms of total surplus. But if we couldn't commit, the amount we would extract in the second period is so big that the creator wouldn't be willing to invest, and we can hold that back with the commitment device and incentivize them to. Okay, so we're getting more quality.
Ethan, this is just kind of just an observation. I don't think it's like relevant for anything in particular, but I'm just thinking about applying this to Web3. And so one thing that seems interesting in Web3 is like I think people generally think, and the many more expert people than me in the room can correct me on this, but like I think we think interoperability is higher, is usually like more baked in Web3, and there's also more governance. But one of the things that strikes me looking at the governance in Web3 is like sometimes the governance is determining the level of interoperability. Like there are votes over decisions about like bridging and stuff. So it seems like there's some interesting potential interaction between the two.
And I'll show you, I mean, there is an interaction here. I'll show you what it is, but it's different than that. So this is just to give you a sense of, okay, so we saw what the willingness to pay or what the platform's preferences, induced preferences, right, indirect preferences over interoperability were. And let me show you now what that willingness to pay or induced preferences are for governance. Okay, so this is what the platform's rents look like in a world with one-sided governance. This is obviously the winning platform. This is the platform that gets governance and gets the market. What do their payoffs look like in a world without governance and with governance? Okay, so down here where theta is really small, you're not getting investment in quality no matter what, and the platform's making zero profits no matter what. In this space, you are getting where now this is we're on the x-axis here. I have the value of the investment. So in this moderate value to the investment, right? You get quality investment if and only if, right? If and only if you have governance. And so now there's this jump up in surplus to the platform. It's now making profits from the quality investment and its ability to extract that surplus from the creator when it has governance, but it can't do it without governance because it can't incentivize quality investment. And then when we get even higher, now we're getting quality investment no matter what. Still, the platform is extracting a little bit of extra rents through this commitment power because it can bargain the creator all the way up to indifference, right? Leaving the creator with absolutely no, right, all the way up to indifference. So the willingness to pay, right, looks non-monotone. It's a zero at very low levels of the importance of the quality investment. It's increasing and increasing rapidly, right, when you can get quality investment if and only if you have governance, and then it jumps back down and then continues to increase once you get both. So there's a little bits of rents to be made even in a world where you're going to get quality investment no matter what, but the big rents are to be had from governance in a world in which governance is what allows you to get people to invest in quality. We can do the same thing, and this is to come to Andy's point, in terms of if we change the x-axis here to be in terms of interoperability. So now, as long as C is not above that upper bound, for any level of interoperability, with commitment, with governance, you can get quality investment. Why? Because interoperability no longer really matters. It matters for the scale of the price you have to pay, but there is no lock-in problem once you have governance, right? Lack of interoperability was blocking investment in governance precisely because it created lock-in. But once you have governance, you don't have to worry about lock-in. So you are always, for any alpha here, as long as C is below that upper bound, for any alpha, you're getting quality investment with governance. But for interoperability too low, you are not getting it without governance. And then there's a jump up for one of them, but again, there's still a little bit of space. And so if we think about willingness to pay, right, at very low levels of interoperability, governance is super valuable. At very high levels at higher levels of interoperability, it's less valuable. These things are kind of substitutes for each other. I guess the only other thing I want you to see here is that when you have governance, interoperability is all bad from the platform's perspective. From everybody else's perspective, it's good, but from the platform's perspective, it's all bad, right? You want low interoperability if you have governance, because interoperability just weakens your bargaining power. There's no interoperability no longer matters for your ability to get quality. It just is a reduction in your operating power. So whereas without governance you wanted moderate interoperability, with governance you want none. So platforms' willingness to pay for governance is highest when innovation occurs if and only if there's governance. And that's for moderate values of the innovation, for moderate costs of the innovation, and for low levels of interoperability. That's when you want governance. We can also, we can talk about sort of all the pass-through and the incidence of governance. So, it does lots of things, right? It affects the fees that get charged. We're running short on time, so I won't belabor these points, but it affects everything, right? It affects the fees that get charged. It affects the prices that gets charged. It affects the level of demand. And so I guess if you just want like the quick take-homes, the average fee is higher without governance when quality happens if and only if governance. The average price is higher without governance in those circumstances, and the average demand is lower without governance. And who benefits? The users benefit from the greater quality investment. The creators are indifferent because they're always getting bid right up to indifference. It's not that they're making zero profits, right? They are, because they have some market power relative to the users. So they're making profits, but they're getting bid to indifference by the platforms, and the platform benefits from governance, and benefits the most when governance is necessary for creating quality investment, and it's good for total surplus. So the last thing I want to see before I talk very briefly about endogenous governance is thinking about the social value of governance relative to the platform's willingness to pay for governance. Okay, so we can write down the social value of governance. That is just this total surplus calculation. Okay, so why is governance valuable? It's valuable because it gets quality investment. Quality investment is good for everybody because quality investment, as long as C is not big, quality investment just creates value that gets passed through, some of it to users, some of it to the platform. So this is the social value of governance. We can compare the social value of governance to the platform's willingness to pay for governance. Okay? And we'll see that the platform's willingness to pay for governance is strictly below the social value of governance, if and only if we're in this world where governance is necessary for quality investment. So this is kind of bad news in the sense that platforms are less willing than the social planner to buy governance if and only if governance is important. Yeah? So governance is important when it's necessary to incentivize quality investment. And that's exactly when the platforms are less willing than the social planner to do so. And that's because there's some pass-through here. The platforms don't capture all of the social value. Okay, so I'll just say one word about, I've studied one-sided governance. You can imagine two-sided governance, right? I've studied no governance and one-sided governance. You can imagine two-sided governance. We can write that model, right? So just think about extending this game, extending the extensive form of game even one more step backwards. So imagine there's a beginning of the game where each of these platforms can buy a governance solution, right, at some positive cost K. And now we know what's going to happen in each of the possible continuation games, right? If we get one-sided governance, we get the outcome we just studied, which I'm going to call pi g, the profits for the platform, right? That's, this. If we get no governance by anybody, we get the thing I studied at the very beginning of this talk, right? The no governance model. And if we get two-sided governance, it's just, as we were talking about, it's kind of obvious if you just think about this model for a second, the platforms at the beginning of the game have to compete each other down to zero profit. Right? If we both have governance and I offer a slightly lower price than you, of course they come to me. And so therefore we're going to compete all the way down to offering fees of zero. Okay? So in a world where we both accidentally buy governance, we both make profits of zero and we bear costs of K. That's very bad for us. And so that's just this simple game, right? We can each buy governance or not. And if I buy governance and you buy governance, we both make negative K because we compete each other down to zero profits and we have to pay the cost of the governance solution. If neither of us do, we get the model I solved at the beginning of the talk. And if only one of us does, we get the model that I solved in the middle of the talk minus the cost of governance, right? And this game has three equilibria, right? At least if K isn't too big. If K is really big, this is the only equilibrium, right? But if K is smaller, then there's pure strategy equilibria where one of us buys governance and the other doesn't. There is not a pure strategy equilibrium where we both buy governance, because if I know you're going to buy governance, I'd rather not and make 0 instead of minus k. But there's also a mixed strategy equilibrium, right? There's a mixed strategy equilibrium where we both randomize, we're both indifferent. The randomization probabilities look like our willingness to pay for governance, a ratio of our willingness to pay for governance minus the cost of governance over the willingness to pay for governance. That's what the mixed strategy in this game looks like. And in that mixed strategy equilibrium, everything's in the support, right? We can get two-sided governance, one-sided governance, no governance. We can think about the comparative statics. That's what that probability looks like as a function.
This is just chicken straight up.
Yeah, exactly. This is just a game of chicken. And so we can also, right, we also know lots of things because it's just a game of chicken about purifying this and what this would look like if we say purified it by making k random. So we can say things about that. We know how to study that game, but I don't know whether I should believe the mixed strategy equilibrium of this game or not. But one could study the global game version of this and say comparative static things about the cutoff, and they have the natural comparative statics. So I'll leave it at that. And just conclude with saying, to sum up, sort of the take-homes I think of the model are both interoperability and governance are ways of addressing lock-in. Platforms, at least in this setting, prefer one-sided governance over interoperability as a solution. If platforms are going to do interoperability, they want to do it only partially, right? Whereas everybody else wants complete interoperability. Governance is good. At least in a world of partial interoperability, governance is good for users and platforms and total surplus, but leaves creators indifferent. Platforms' willingness to pay for governance is below the social value of governance, in particular in the range of parameter values where governance actually matters for outcomes. That is, whenever governance would inspire quality investment and the lack of governance would not in equilibrium, that's when platforms are underwilling to invest in governance. And then I've got lots of questions about what possible next steps might be. You can think about a model with lots of creators. You can think about a model with multi-homing. You can think about a more properly dynamic model. I think that's actually straightforward to do here. You can think about other sources of lock-in, like search costs or network effects. Open to other ideas. That's what I got.
So Ethan, I'm sure there'll be questions from the audience, but maybe just before you get to those questions, it might be helpful now to sort of connect this to Web3. I think some of the connections are pretty obvious, like these questions about governance and lock-in are pretty core to people's interest in Web3, but it just might be helpful to hear from you, like what parts of this, you've looked at Web3 quite a bit, where are you thinking about connections to Web3 here more explicitly?
Yeah, so I mean, and Andy's like being like the straight man or something. So Andy and I have written a bit about holdup problems in platforms, and I think that I do actually believe, in a way that's somewhat hard to convince them of, but I believe that Web 2 platforms are suffering substantially from the holdup problem. I think that their creators do know that their profits are getting eroded and are underinvesting, and that they need solutions to that problem. And I think that governance is trivial here in the sense that there's only one creator, but in a world with lots of creators, like buying a governance solution is not trivial for lots of reasons. It's hard to get participation, but also it's like hard to implement. And I think that the kind of whole spirit of thinking about, well, what are robust systems of decentralized governance online is like, that's a first order question for implementing something like a solution. So I think from my perspective, like the connection to Web3 is like there's lots of innovative work going on. I'm thinking about how might we implement secure, robust governance solutions. And I think this is maybe from my perspective at least, or my view, an underappreciated use case for online governance. I think like just lots of online life has platformy like things and has lock-in, and there's lots of opportunity to improve business outcomes with a good governance solution. And I think one has to first successfully make the case to some sort of e-commerce company that in fact the holdup problem is real in order to convince them that they should think about governance. But it seems obvious to me that you watch creators for these platforms talk about it themselves, and they are all now aware. I mean, they may not have been they were not perfect game theoretic agents ex ante, and maybe it didn't occur to them that the App Store was going to increase, in-app purchase fees, or that Etsy was going to start taking all of their rents. But they know so now. And I think if you think about who's building cool apps now or who's building whatever, they are thinking about which platforms are more or less likely to let them keep some profits in the future once they become dominant. I think network effects and interoperability and all these things mean lock-in is forever. And so I think like there's just going to be there should be natural demand for governance solutions that comes out of that set of problems.
So if you had a different distribution, non-uniform distribution on lambdas, everything here I think would still hold qualitatively.
It couldn't be an arbitrary distribution, but like the MLRP or something like that would be enough, right? You don't want like. I think, although I'm not a price theorist, so my intuitions about this come from thinking like game theoretically, and I think like price theorists would have much more to say about like what makes for a well-behaved demand function. So I'll have to have more to say about that. But it's completely obvious to me that that in a world where I had the MLRP in the distribution, then I'm just going to get I'm just going to get like a nice decreasing function of P and an increasing function of Q in exactly the way I want for my demand function. If the distribution had weird humps and bumps and stuff, maybe not. I don't know.
Just like kind of a request as a next step is I think thinking through how the analysis evolves if the platform creates value in a more meaningful way. So as something where the platform and the creator together, where the platform does something that creates value, that it's more than just a pass-through or conduit. Because in your model, the platform is really just a conduit between the customer and the creator. And in that model, all you want to do is get prices beaten down to zero. And actually, the stock exchange work I talked about on Monday is I think a good example where in that market a few decades ago, the exchanges had a lot of market power that came from to trade stock. You had to be together in the room together. That gave them network effects and lock-in. And then as the market got more electronic, interoperability was then regulatorily mandated by the SEC, and fees got beaten down to zero. I mean, I showed you they're like 0.0001 cents per share. So they are the take rate in the U.S. stock market is 1/100,000th of the take rate in a lot of other platform markets. But as soon as you have the exchange, the platform doing more than just being a conduit, and then it strikes me as a much harder, like a lot more economic moving pieces. Because then you worry that Tim used the word ossified earlier in the talk. You worry about a platform where governance is completely decentralized, not being able to flexibly move with the times.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And just thinking through those trade-offs strikes me as really interesting and promising.
So at least what I know of the platform market literature, the theoretical literature, it all has this characteristic, right? I think the value in the models, like the implicit value of the platform, is exclusively some assumption that the two sides of the market couldn't find each other without the platform, and there's no other, that's it. Like if they weren't there, there'd be no transactions, and so there's no value other than absent it, the market wouldn't exist. I guess there's some things where that seems more or less right to me, but I take it so if I think about what is Apple's App Store, what value is it adding other than matching app users to app developers? I guess it's providing some content moderation kind of function.
Works well with iPhones, right? Apple does that. The iPhone is a special product, right? That gives them some market power. Uber will do trust and safety stuff and the ratings and the app. They're doing stuff that's hard to imagine a fully, and I'm very curious to talk about this with this room, but like a fully decentralized Web3 thing doing some of the a driver got in a crash, let's investigate whose fault it was.
So if you were to think about this in this model, is the right way to think about that the platforms themselves should be heterogeneous, one platform should be better than the other? Is that what you have in mind?
I honestly don't have in mind a particular way to model it. It strikes me as a hard, modeling judgment will be required, but just something where you think through where there's genuinely gotta be great if the platform could commit not to raise its price, but it would also be great if the platform had the flexibility to innovate as circumstances change. And those two things are kind of in tension with each other. And
that's related to what Andy
I don't
was
have an
asking.
insight how to model it exactly.
I think it's super. I agree. I think it's super important because I think it's the strongest counter argument. Like, I'm not saying it's correct in reality, but I think it's the absolutely strongest counter argument. So if you talk to people who work at large platforms today, they'll tell you like we expend enormous amounts of resources shaving like 1/8 of a second off the load time on the next piece of content in your feed because otherwise we'll lose that user to another platform. And we do all this fancy AI to serve you like the stuff you really like. That's what TikTok would say or something, and they had to invest a ton to figure out how to do that and so forth. And then their view is therefore like they think that's the entire game, and so they think of governance as like a pointless expense that would make the service slower or less agile. And that's definitely, and you've heard that argument before, I know. And so I think that's definitely like their baseline view, I think, on this model would be like the costs of governance are extremely high because it would prevent the platform from swiftly implementing what's necessary to remain like competitive.
Yeah. So the model captured that in the sense that if the costs of governance are high, they won't buy governance, and maybe that's the world we're in, that they believe that, and maybe they're wrong and maybe they're right. If there was like I could invest in the quality of the platform, they are making some rents here. Like they're not right. They're not competing themselves all the way to zero.
So sometimes there are decisions like that change the algorithmic feed, right? So like YouTube has constantly changed like what type of videos they're going to surface.
Yeah.
And that has like distributional effects on certain types of creators. Like certain types of creators just went bankrupt, others made tons of money as a result. So there's like there's at least a politics between creators and their agreement. It's not pricing. Like with pricing, all creators kind of agree that better, but like the prank videos were bad for YouTube in general, I think, because they made a lot of money, but I think they like created like policy risk, like they were encouraging people to do dangerous things. And so they tried to downweight them. As a result, all the prank video guys did poorly, but all the cooking shows did well or something. Like there was a winner and a loser in that change.
So like another definition of interoperability is like interacting with applications on other platforms. Like for instance, in Web3, if I think of like two rollups as like two like ecosystems, and applications on rollup are these contents, like these whatever these creators do, and rollup itself is a platform. Now, when I do interoperability, I not only make it like now easier to retain quality when I move to the other side, because I retain my connections with my friends on the other side, but I also like increase my inherent value where I am. So this might be another effect to incorporate into the analysis. Because even without moving, I can now talk to the other apps. So
I get it.
I will be increasing my like quality.
Yeah, and for that, you'd want at least a model where users could multi-home. Yeah, okay, thanks.
I'm wondering if you had some intuition on a model where like a new platform is joining. So for simplicity, let's say you only had one platform at the start that kind of incentivizes high quality always for the creator. And now if like a new platform is joining in and it has basically two axes that it can make decisions on how interoperable it wants to be with the first platform and how whether it chooses governance or not, and if what like equilibrium looks like there, what like the best decision.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So what that second platform would do, and mind you, this isn't a model without switching costs, right? So switching costs are going to move this around a little bit in ways that might be interesting, might interact with governance interestingly. I'm not sure. That entering platform, if they could choose anything, would choose zero interoperability and governance. Right? Because they can come in, they can win if they have governance, and that's going to maximize their rents. As long as governance isn't too expensive. If governance is expensive, they'd want to come in and offer, it's a little complicated. So as I was saying to Pablo earlier, like interoperability, it seems to me, is in lots of ways a two-way street. So if I come in, what can I do? I can build my thing interoperable with you, but If that also means you're interoperable with me, which it seems like it must, then that doesn't really help me. I'm still going to lose. I think what I want to do is I want to enter and I want to use, if all I have is the tools I've modeled here, I want to enter and I want to have governance, and then I can win. And I'm willing to enter because I am going to make positive rents, as long as entry costs aren't too high.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all. I really appreciate it.